Hello, and welcome to another episode of the TheoBros Podcast. David here, your friendly neighborhood Christian nationalist, and joining me is a fellow veteran of the culture war, Jake Metzger.
Veteran, you could call me that. How you doing, David?
Pretty good.
Good to hear.
I believe this is episode number 2. I don't think we've done a second one yet.
Yeah, this is our second episode.
Yeah, so I'm excited.
For the Theo Von Fan Bro podcast, right?
Which is really funny because that will tie in at some point.
Will tie in, yeah. So.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. I'd always vigilant. English is hard.
It's so hard.
I'd always envisaged this podcast as being like purely like kind of a roundtable discussion. But, I figured having some just one-on-one theological discussions is cool to do as well.
Yeah.
So I guess if you're ready to dive right in, we'll get right to our topic.
You know me and David with theological discussions. I always feel ready, but never prepared.
Yeah, same.
What do we got on the docket today, Mr. Reed?
So today I wanted to talk about the faith deconstruction movement. It's not really a movement per se, but that's kind of a term that's been sort of attached. So I guess to start things off, we'll answer the question, what is deconstruction?
Yeah, what is it?
So this is a definition from one of the deconstructioners I do want to talk about, David Hayward, who goes online as under the name Naked Pastor, I believe. His definition of deconstruction is as follows. Deconstruction of Christian faith refers to the process of critically examining and dismantling previously held beliefs, doctrines, and practices associated with one's religious upbringing. It involves questioning and reevaluating the tenets of faith, often leading to a reformation or even abandonment of certain beliefs. So basically, what has happened, there's been sort of like a movement. It's not really a movement, but it's more like just, I guess you could say, a mass of people doing this thing where they, reevaluate their Christian faith. They sort of deconstruct it. They pick it apart. They look at all the individual doctrines that they were taught and try to take a critical look at them. It's often motivated by like doubts or personal crises or sometimes abuse, sometimes hardship in life, stuff like that. And yeah, that could go a number of different ways, but I kind of want to talk about a certain subset of deconstructioners that I've been seeing who start off as strong evangelical believers and then end up as something else entirely.
Okay.
So David Hayward, whose definition of deconstruction I just read, is one of those people. Another one is someone we've talked about on the podcast before. It's Joshua Harris, the man who kissed dating goodbye.
Man, did he kiss it hard. French kissed it, in fact.
With tongue.
Oh, nearly.
Okay.
All right, it's getting a little graphic. Let's keep moving on. You bet you didn't expect to hear a French kissing joke on a theological discussion podcast. There you go, baby.
Another prominent one that you might have heard of is the singer Marty Sampson. So he was involved in Hillsong worship and has written and sang a number of worship songs that I personally enjoy. And then, eventually I can't remember. It was only a few years ago too. I can't remember exactly when, but then out of the blue, he's like, started posting on social media, like, guys, I'm not sure I believe in God anymore, kind of a thing. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking through what he wrote, his writing credits. I'm kind of seeing some random songs maybe I've heard. He wrote one thing,
Yeah.
2007. Whoa. That's kind of crazy.
The one of his that I really like, he's um I don't think he didn't solely write it, but he's credited as one of the writers, is Oh Praise the Name.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see it right here.
That is actually one of my favorite worship songs, to be honest.
Yeah, he wrote it with Benjamin Hastings and Dean Usher.
Yeah, which is really, it's one of those things too with the deconstruction movement. It's often people who are have very much bought into the evangelical faith sort of ecosystem. They're actively involved in ministry or in churches somehow, some way. They're often very knowledgeable about the Bible, and they're often very, prior to their deconstruction, they're often very staunch defenders of the faith, staunch defenders of, conservative sort of orthodoxy, like, the traditional doctrines of the Trinity, of hell, of sin, salvation, all that kind of stuff, biblical inerrancy. But then after they go through this deconstruction process, come out something that looks very much like the world, while at the same time still claiming to be a Christian in some sense.
Yeah, I find it interesting. I remember you were bringing up the guy that wrote Not in a Hurry. I can't remember the guy's name. And Good Morning. What's that?
Will Reagan?
Yeah, Will Reagan. I remember you and me were discussing him and his comments during the pandemic time and social media and that kind of thing, and his political leanings specifically.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing those and I was like, oh, interesting. Well, I find that very fascinating because he wrote some really interesting worship songs that were great. They're still great, I'd say. But to see his political leanings and him be so outspoken about that versus the traditional viewpoint of Christian people and that kind of thing. Before we get any further, I think it would be fair, David, to have a disclaimer of who you and me are. Like, we grew up in the church, that kind of thing. And at least for me, I have questioned it before, but I don't know necessarily about the whole deconstruction process. I don't think I've ever been through any kind of process, or if I have, it's been a very light version of that, where I'm like, okay, what does this all mean? Is this actually like beneficial or not, like in my analytical brain? Then I came to the conclusion, I'm like, well, I mean, at the very, layman's term, it's a very decent way to live. So let's start there. And then as I grew up and grew into my 20s as an adult, my relationship with God got deeper and deeper. And my perspective now is kind of seeing people deconstruct and move away from the faith is very fascinating because it's pretty much all I've ever known. So I think that's the disclaimer I would have if you're listening to this discussion, or if you're God curious or what have you, then that's kind of the perspective I'm coming from. But what about you, David?
I think I came pretty
just for a little background.
Yeah, I think in my teenage years, came pretty close to the kind of deconstruction that these people have undergone. I was very depressed, and I've always been a natural skeptic. Like, it's hard for me to just take what someone says at face value.
Mm.
So I've always been very, very skeptical, despite growing up in the church and despite identifying as a Christian, like professing Christian belief from a very young age. But I got to a place kind of late high school, just after high school, where I was just very depressed. I lacked direction. Like, my faith that I had held on to for, the amount of time that I had seemed almost hollow, almost empty. and I drifted away from church for a little bit. But then, in my lowest moment, God met me and sort of drew me back closer to Him. And ever since then, my faith has always been based on, um, the very real experience I've had of drawing near to Jesus. Um, After almost walking away from Him. So I kind of been in the same, I think I've been in the same places as these people have, but I guess, you know, thank God I didn't go all the way with it. But yeah, that's kind of my story.
Okay. I just think it's important just to lay the groundwork for those listening, say they're new viewer or whatever. And thank you for listening, by the way. But yeah, where do you want to go from here?
So yeah, I kind of want to talk about this deconstruction phenomenon, just kind of like sort of lay the groundwork for what exactly we're talking about here. So you watched that clip of Rhett, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So okay, so this is kind of what got me thinking about this topic a lot more. Well, seeing this and also seeing the social media post by the David Hayward, aka Naked Pastor, popping up on Facebook in like in terms of like people having theological discussions about the stuff he was posting, kind of a thing. But yeah, so that, and also this video on YouTube of Rhett, of the McLaughlin, I think his last name is, of the Good Mythical Morning Show, Rhett and Link. And it's basically, it's titled Why I Can't Stop Talking About Jesus, or Why I Won't Stop Talking About Jesus. And it basically, he goes through his sort of deconstruction process, using metaphors, using like dating metaphors, talking about losing his faith in Jesus in the terms of like, you know, having a difficult breakup with, you know, with a partner, kind of a thing. And it's a really cringy and weird way to go with it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was kind of eye-opening because it kind of encapsulated a lot of things that I'd been seeing in different people, both in life and on the internet. And so yeah, so his sort of deconstruction is kind of the one I want to talk about, the one that's most interesting to me, because what happened with him is he had a very hardcore evangelical upbringing. I believe he was going to college to go into ministry at some point.
Going to seminary.
Yeah.
And that's where they get you.
But yeah, he basically describes having this experience of feeling like, of having doubts, having questions, feeling like the people around him weren't trying to help him work through those doubts and questions, but were essentially trying to shame him and bully him back to a place of orthodoxy. You know, and he also talks about, touches on some political stuff too, which is very, he doesn't quite do it in so many like terms, but if you pay attention to online discourse, you can tell what he's talking about. He's basically saying that Christians are too right wing, and that we've lost the plot and got strayed from Jesus's message of love your neighbor, and apparently that's all Jesus's message was love your neighbor.
Which it's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was watching the video on my way back from my way home, and it was a really interesting watch. I think encapsulation is the right term to use to describe it. I think it's a great video to watch as a believer to get exactly the perspective of somebody who's walked away and how they feel about it, and how even if they walked away, the world they live in, the creation that is surrounding them, you can still see God's influence in the world, which I find really interesting. That, like he said, let's call Jesus Jesus so it's not sacrilege, which I thought was kind of funny. And I thought it was interesting because I think he walked away, he deconstructed, he walked away, but he still somewhat feels a pull. It's almost like, forgive me, it's almost like Kylo Ren from Force Awakens, David. Like, he walked away from the Jedi Order and he still feels the tempting of being of the light side.
The cringe is certainly on that level.
The cringe is certainly on that level, yeah. Forgive me for the level of cringe I just embellished on you guys. But I think that there's an interesting descriptor I watched from Ruslan KD on one of the things we're going to discuss later. And he said the pain of staying the same when the pain of staying the same is not, I'm going to butcher it, but it's basically when the pain of staying the same is easier than making that change. Like, the pain you experience from wanting to change, when it doesn't match the pain the pain of staying the same, you're not going to change because you're going to go with what feels less painful. So if it's painful to live in your current state of what you're in, of your lifestyle, of what you believe in, the struggle within, vices, what have you, when the pain of staying the same is far less than the pain of actually making that step forward and changing, human beings, we're just going to choose the easier option.
Yeah.
So I think that's basically where I get the point I'm coming to when I watch that video, is you could make the change, and it seems like he has made a very painful change. But I think that almost like a marriage, that sometimes, even though you feel like it would be best to walk away, staying in there and what you know is far easier. I have a relative, as an example, who probably should have walked away from a marriage a long time ago, like a long, long time ago. But he stayed, even though it's a very hostile and not very good lifestyle he's in.
Mm.
And I'm sure there'll be repercussions for that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that necessarily works for this analogy or what we're talking about, but it seems like it was the opposite with Rhett. He walked away and is still feeling that call, basically.
Yeah, well, that does touch on something that I feel kind of like is common across this sort of subgroup of deconstructioners, and also kind of mirrors my own life experience as well, is that you get to a place of burnout if you're committed to the faith in a actionable way. That is, you're attending church, you're doing ministry, you're giving your time and your energy to the church in some way. It's real easy, if you're not close to the Lord, if you substitute performative sort of sense of duty for your closeness with God, eventually you get to a place where you're burned out. And it's kind of the same thing you were talking about. You just sort of stay in that, you just sort of stay the way you are because it's a lot easier to stay the way you are than, go through a change. But then it gets to a certain point where you're so burned out
Mm.
and it's so painful to live the way you've been living that you're ready for a change. And sometimes the opportunity for change that is presented to you is not exactly a good one.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I feel that's kind of what's going on with this kind of deconstruction movement. It's deceptive.
Mm.
People say things or people are told things that don't necessarily sound wrong on the face of it, but they lead you to a place where you're no longer close to the Lord. You're drawing closer to worldly values, and sometimes you don't even realize it. Like, for example, Rhett in that video has this impression that the place he's arrived is actually closer to Jesus's teachings than, all the evangelicals he grew up with. When in reality, his idea of, Jesus just said, love your neighbor is basically, it's like a shallow, worldly view of love that can't accomplish any good in this world.
Mm.
One thing I did want to read is from the David Hayward's blog. And he's actually like a deconstruction proponent. And from what I understand, Joshua Harris has also become one of these too. He's like, I guess, offers like classes and seminars on deconstruction now. It's really weird. But yeah, so the way so on David Hayward's blog here, he has uh, awesome things about the deconstruction of faith. So number one is authenticity. Deconstructing beliefs can lead to a more authentic and personal faith that aligns with your true beliefs and values. You don't have to pretend to believe things you don't or pretend to be someone you are not. It makes you feel a whole lot lighter. Ask me, I know. Number two is freedom. Breaking away from rigid doctrines can provide a sense of liberation and autonomy in your spiritual journey. It's like that Fleetwood Mac song, You Can Go Your Own Way. You will feel and be free to grow in your own direction without the fear of damnation, without being told it is wrong. Personal growth. Deconstruction encourages intellectual and spiritual growth, which creates a deeper understanding of yourself and your beliefs. When you know yourself, your understanding of everything else is expanded. And finally, community. When you are authentic, you can find and hang out with people who like you for who you are, not just for what you believe. You can make friends who love you unconditionally and without judgment. So a lot of this stuff sounds like, if you look at it uncritically, it sounds really cool. And if you're in a moment where anything is preferable to staying the way that you are, you could easily get fooled by rhetoric like this, because it sounds like you're going to finally be free of all the shackles of all the doubt and
a lot of promises,
religious indoctrination, and you're going to be free to live as who you really are.
Yeah, speaking of cringy, seriously, Fleetwood Mac, come on, gang.
Yeah,
Come on, man. Seriously? Yeah, I agree. Like, if you don't look at it critically, like, as you're reading that off, I'm like, what is this? Like, is this some sort of promise? Like, do you like the order of the church? Do you want an unorderly lifestyle and just free your heart? Not subject to the whims of worship, but the whims of you? It's like, that sounds, or borderline getting to the point of, Book of Satan over here, from the Satan church. A little bit. Do what it pleases you, or whatever it says.
Yeah.
In the Satanist Bible.
There's a song that Bob Dylan wrote during his brief flirtation with Christianity. And while I have serious doubts about whether he actually came to any kind of real faith in Jesus or even came close to that at all. Yeah, he did. He wrote one song which just the title like sums up such a powerful truth that rhetoric like this is designed to try and quietly lead you away from, and that is you got to serve somebody. It's like it's one of those things is it's a fundamental aspect of human nature. It's how we are made by God. He made us this way intentional, that whoever or whatever we give ourselves over to, we become in bondage to that. And so rhetoric like this makes you think that if you reject traditional doctrines of Christianity, if you reject the quote unquote indoctrination, propaganda of the church, and just, figure things out for yourself, you'll be truly free. But in reality, what happens is you essentially make yourself subject to your own passions. And it talks about that in Romans 1, people who reject God and give themselves over to their just fleshly passions and desires, thinking that it makes them more free, when in reality they become slaves to those passions and desires, and those passions and desires eventually mutate into something corrupted and something perverse.
Yeah, I want to use that to transition to whatever you have next. Maybe one or the other, depends on what you want, what direction you want. But let's kind of dissect what he wrote there a little bit. Like, let's start with the first one. Could you read the first one again?
All right, so the first one is authenticity. Deconstructing beliefs can lead to a more authentic and personal faith that aligns with your true beliefs and values. You don't have to pretend to believe things that you don't, or pretend to be someone you are not. It makes you feel a whole lot lighter. Ask me, I know.
So what he said there, it makes you feel a whole lot lighter, is you're throwing off a burden of some kind in his point of view. Is it the burden of religion, of expectations?
Yeah, I think it's the burden of feeling like you're chained to Christian doctrines, whether it's the fear of hell or whether it's the condemnation of things like homosexuality, whatever it may be. People who get burned out, people who don't have a real connection with the Lord in their walk as Christians, eventually the Christian faith itself becomes a burden to them, because they're essentially trying to hold the whole thing up by their own strength. And so something like this comes in is like, oh, you could just drop that burden and you could just be your true self,
Huh, weird.
Yeah, but it's like, what he doesn't tell you is your quote unquote true self that you become is simply you're chaining yourself to something else. You're unchaining yourself from the gospel and chaining yourself to whatever it is that you've decided to pursue in this deconstruction process, whether it's just rejection of belief in God, or whether it's, deciding to join the LGBTQ community, thinking that's your identity, whether you're gay or transgender or what have you, kind of a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it could lead into a lot of directions that you can go from what he's saying. But I think the one direction is the same, is you're just serving yourself at the end of the day. It's not any particular thing or goal. It's just have at it. You're living for yourself now. And I find it interesting as a believer to see it that way, because it can be enticing at times. I mean, I've felt burnout plenty of times in ministry. I mean, For context, I've been in youth. I'm not saying like a youth minister or anything, but I've been involved in youth ministry for 10 plus years at this point, and David in and out basically the same amount of time, I would say, maybe even more. And I've definitely experienced burnout. Me and Stephen, who we've had on the pod before, there's a point where it's just me and him leading the youth group, just us, nobody else. And, went from 6 leaders to 2. And it was rough because every Saturday was basically like, whew, we looked at each other. We're like, wow, we got through another Saturday. Holy crap. This is insane. So I've definitely experienced that burnout. And even right now, I'm in the transition out of youth ministry for this next season of my life. And even as I'm getting closer to the end of that, I'm questioning myself, like, why am I doing this? I've been doing it for so long. Is there a reason I'm leaving? And I know the reason I'm leaving, obviously. Like, I know that answer. But I think that the temptation of not going to church or skipping out or whatever. I mean, right now I'm working Sundays for my job so I can stay at youth group on Saturdays, So it's like not going to church has actually had that impact on my life negatively, I would say, in the sense of like, well, many reasons, but basically being away from what I perceive as causing the burnout is very enticing to stay away from, I would say, just from a small example of what I've experienced.
Yeah, and I've gone through something similar when I was younger. I stepped away from church because going to church just felt hollow, felt kind of empty. It felt kind of burdensome. And since I've gotten back on the path of walking with the Lord in communion with Him, after sort of rediscovering that my faith is actually built on my relationship with God and not based on ministry or going to church or anything like that. Since I've sort of made that change, being away from church and being away from ministry actually is, for the times that I've had to do it, has actually been very difficult to deal with. I've been working at my current job for about 9 years now, and my first, I want to say like 10 months or so there, I had to work Sundays, and so I couldn't go to church. And just because of my work schedule and the days that I worked, there was really I had no fellowship options, and being away from church was actually very damaging to my mental health. Like, it's amazing how a simple perspective shift can turn around things, because when you're in a place of burnout, church and doing ministry, just, it's so hard and so weighty, and that's because you're holding it up yourself. But then once you get to a place where you're prioritizing your relationship and connection to the Lord, then it's almost as if that all of that stuff transforms, because now you're being strengthened by the Lord. You're doing it in the Lord's strength. You're resting in Him. It talks about that in Hebrews, about somebody who has they've rested from their own works and are now taking up the burden of the gospel, which Jesus says His yoke is easy and His burden is light. So once you are doing that, it's actually quite difficult to tear yourself away from church, because being in community with other believers and operating in the giftings that God has given you and operating in the mission whatever mission field he's placed you in actually brings you life, because that's who you were created to be. That's part of who you were created to be. That's part of your design. And so being wrenched away from that is actually damaging. And it all comes about because of a simple perspective shift. It's not you holding the whole thing up. It's you resting in the finished work of Jesus Christ and doing whatever you can to stay close to him. And I fear that what a lot of these deconstructioners have done is in low points in their life and points of burnout and points of pain, they've become beguiled by worldly doctrines, and instead of drawing closer to the Lord to alleviate their pain, they shrank back away from him. And being deceived by worldly doctrine, they don't see themselves, they don't feel the pain of losing their connection to God, because they either never had it to begin with, or they had been operating without it for so long that they had forgotten what it was like. And so with the pain of trying to hold up their faith and their ministry all by themselves goes away, they think they're free. And in reality, they've just become subtly chained to something else.
I think it kind of coincides with your foundation and what you stand on. I mean, you said your self-perspective change, but I think that where your foundation lies growing up, and whether or you're going to church or just starting to go to church or recently got born again or something like that, I think that a lot of people who come from like our background, who were in church their whole lives, and then the world kind of, not us, but the Joshua Harrises of the world and their Matthew Hayward, is that right?
David Hayward.
David Hayward. It's like they had the foundation, they were substituting their foundation for, in quotes, being a good person. And that didn't get them very far, and it didn't help them during those hard times. When the questions came in, when the doubt came in, and it settled into their mind. And I think a lot of people struggle with that, believers and even non-believers. Man, I have a lot of stuff I want to transition into from this, but we need to bring up Theo Vaughn, if you may. Where do you want to go?
Real quick, I want to dive into one more topic before we go there.
Yeah, let's do that.
So,
before that, I counterattack Uno reverse card, David. What's the one from Mr. David Hayward? There's one up from the bottom that stood out to me. We started with authenticity.
There's authenticity, freedom, personal growth, and community.
Read the personal growth one again.
Okay. Deconstruction encourages intellectual and spiritual growth, which creates a deeper understanding of yourself and your beliefs. When you know yourself, your understanding of everything else is expanded.
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to basically worshiping yourself.
Yeah.
For lack of a better term. And yeah, again, it's enticing, but it doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah.
You gotta serve someone.
Yeah, worshiping yourself, the worship of the self eventually just ends up, you're chained to your own passions and desires.
Yeah.
Like your
identity is rooted in your fleshly being.
Yeah.
And whatever comes from that, which is, vices and the desires of the flesh.
Yeah.
Who cares if you're a good person? Like, if you're rooted in yourself spiritually, you're a dead man anyway.
Yep. Yeah.
What's the last one? You said community.
So the last one, community, is when you are authentic, you can find and hang out with people who like you for who you are, not just for what you believe. You can make friends who love you unconditionally and without judgment. And that's the thing that really comes up a lot is
without judgment.
They basically, these people have migrated away from believers who want to hold them accountable to people who just want to tell them what they want to hear, basically.
Yeah. And it's like promising these things like you'll have friends, because there's a lot of people that seek community like you and want to make friends with you. And it's man, it feels like that island from Pinocchio, man,
Yeah.
with all the donkey kids.
But yeah, I wanted to get into the topic of the foundation, basically.
Okay.
Because I can't lay the blame for these deconstructioners solely on themselves. The evangelical sort of institutions have failed people in a lot of ways, and it's very evident from watching the clip of Rhett from Good Mythical Morning talk about his experiences. It sounds like he had a lot of people around him who were basically more interested in making sure that he was saying the right things and professing the right things than actually helping him to grow and live as a Christian in a way that's sustainable. Like it doesn't seem like they were actually interested in helping him build a proper foundation for his faith. They just wanted him to say the right things
or obey the rules that were given.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of evangelical institutions, churches, seminaries, schools, in general, have done a whole lot to raise really squishy, unprincipled believers who then are easy prey for this kind of rhetoric. And so I wanted to talk briefly about a couple of the Wes Huff videos I shared with you.
Yeah.
Because part of the answer to this problem is the church needs to get serious about discipling people in ways that help them build a strong foundation of their faith. Because what ends up happening is people with a weak foundation, they go to anyone who seems like they know what they're talking about, and they're like, oh, this guy's saying something different from what I grew up believing. Oh, he must be right because he sounds like he knows a lot, or he's a college professor or something like that. There's the one Wes Huff video, I think it was the longer one, where he showed a clip of David Cross, the comedian, talking about what his understanding of the transmission and translation of the scriptures was like. And in my experience, it's like people eat this stuff up. Even people raised in Christian households eat this stuff up. They get out of their little evangelical bubble when they grow up. They either go to college or they just, go to work somewhere where they're more isolated from their, their Christian circle that they grew up in. And they just uncritically absorb this idea that the Bible is like, a millennia old game of telephone, and the Bible that we have today is been retranslated, re-edited, reinterpreted, corrupted. People in power have excised the parts that they don't like from it, and all this other stuff that is completely contrary to reality. And yet evangelical institutions continue to raise up people who have the kind of squishy, uncritical faith, who just absorb this stuff uncritically, as if it's just the truth, when it couldn't be further from the truth. Like the thing about the shorter video that I showed you, where Wes Huff is talking about undesigned coincidences, little parts, little details in each of the Gospels, each of the four Gospels, about the same story, the same part of the story, but they present little details that are different in each one, and they intersect in surprising ways where if you actually look at it from where you actually critically look at it, you can see how, like, these little details could not have been something that was just made up. It was not a case of four people who got together and it's like, okay, we're going to make this up and we're going to make sure to get our story straight. They wouldn't have come up with, like, people who get together to try and make up narratives based on, some pre-existing idea. They're not going to write down the details in the same way that four independent eyewitnesses would. And it's the same thing for people who are trying to embellish a story that's already out there with legendary or mythical elements, or the case of people who, a story that gets transmitted orally from person to person, and people eventually forget the details and add new ones as the story is transmitted. Like, all of those things would not produce the kind of thing that we see in the Gospels, where the details of each individual gospel account sort of corroborates the other in ways where, like, if somebody was making up the story, they wouldn't have written that way. One thing that was really quite interesting was the story of feeding the 5,000.
Yeah.
That Wes Huff talks about I think he talks about it in both videos, actually. And how initially Jesus asked Philip, how can these people get some food? And it's like, you don't really think about it if you're just reading it. But if you think about it from the perspective of this was made up, it doesn't make any sense why that person would have picked Philip to be the person that Jesus asks initially for the, how can these people be fed? Like, he's not one of the top dogs of the disciples. It would make much more sense for him to ask someone who's in the inner circle. It would also make some more sense for him to ask somebody who is connected to finances in some way, or money, either Matthew the tax collector or Judas, the one who was, the treasurer of the group. But no, he asked Philip, who's who's a very minor character in the gospel accounts. He specifically asked Philip, how can these people be fed? And then, but you start reading the story in each individual gospel account, and you start reading other narratives in the gospel accounts that aren't really connected, that aren't at first glance connected to the story of the feeding of the 5,000. And you can piece together that, in fact, the reason why Jesus asked him is because Philip was a local of the area that they were in. So he would know who was selling bread and how much it could be gotten for. So he'd be the person to ask, how can we get these guys some food? But that's not immediately obvious unless you pick out and put all these little details together. And it's so cool. And I've studied this stuff, and, but I had never come across this particular facet of hermeneutics before, these undesigned coincidences, and it kind of blew my mind. It's like, I thought I thought I had a pretty good handle on like the the authenticity of scripture and all that, but this actually blew my mind.
Yeah, and the little anecdote about how in one of the gospels it says much grass, and then the other one it says green grass. And then Wes Huff brings up a picture of what that land would be today geographically and what time of the year it would have been. And yeah, it would have been, March or February in this part of the year where there is more green grass than it is dry. Because you look at it now, say in the summertime, there's dead grass everywhere. Some green, but not a whole lot. But it's interesting how some of the gospels have little details that differentiate it, So it's pretty cool.
And that reminds me too of a guy, I never really followed him or read his stuff. So it was one of those things that I was just like, that's an interesting claim if true. But there's this guy who I guess was a detective for most of his life. And he was also an unbeliever for most of his life. And he came to faith by supposedly noticing due to his police work, noticing that the Gospels were written in such a way that they didn't look like they were made up. They looked like eyewitness accounts. And I guess he wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity.
Okay, yeah. I know who you're talking. I think I remember listening to a podcast where they interviewed that guy. Yeah.
So I never actually looked into any of that. So I was just like, that's cool if true. But my skeptical brain is just like, I'm not going to put stock in it just because I heard someone say that.
Yeah.
But then after seeing this whole like undesigned coincidence thing at work, I'm starting to think like that guy probably speaking the truth.
You know what? It's interesting because we talked about deconstructionism, and now we're talking about the aspect that actually like hunkers down, takes time, and studies the scripture. I think when you critiquing what you know, it's important to ask questions, obviously, but I think it's even more important to ask the right questions. Like, it's more important to take your time and actually study what is being said. I mean, you could do the same thing with a professor for an assignment or what have you. But or a better example, the history of your country you're from, like say American history for you and me, like studying what was written, the accounts, the different characters of that era, if we're talking Revolutionary War, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, all these people and the such. So it's just really interesting to see Wes Huff bring that up. But I think it kind of opens my eyes because it reminds me of people like Gary Wayne, for example. He wrote the book called The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Now, there's a lot of things he says I don't necessarily agree with or have taken a deep dive into, but it's interesting because his perspective is he went out to try to disprove what was claimed to him of Christianity, that it was the only way. So he went out and tried to disprove it, and in trying to disprove it, he actually got saved, and he kept studying it and studying it and studying it, and now he's written several books throughout his life. I think he's close to his 70s or in his 70s at this point, and he still has more questions and just this vast knowledge of, I think his goal was he went and read every apocrypha and story and mythology in the world. And he came to the conclusion that Christianity had the most weight behind it.
Interesting. That kind of reminds me of Lee Strobel, who wrote The Case for Christ.
Yeah.
Kind of a investigative journalist type dude who initially looked into it basically so he could prove his wife wrong, who had converted, and then Dude. In looking into it seriously, he came to faith himself. But yeah, one more thing I wanted to go over too before we move on to the stuff that you want to talk about is because basically the reason why I bring up this Wes Huff stuff and all this apologetic stuff is because part of the blame for this deconstruction movement lies on evangelical institutions. Like we as Christians need to be aware of the dangers that are out there in the world, and we got to raise up the next generation of believers with the tools to be able to tackle that kind of stuff. Because what's been happening, um, as was happened to so many people that I know, the people are raised up without any firm foundation for why they believe what they believe. And at the first hint of worldly doctrine that speaks against their Christian upbringing, all of a sudden they're being carried away. So one aspect of this is, one aspect, the reason why we're bringing up the apologetic stuff, is these worldly ideas about the authenticity of Scripture that just go completely unchallenged because people aren't actually taught the truth about how we got the Scriptures, how we got the Bible we got today. Another aspect too is it's partly political, partly ideological. You notice this, like you can see this in the Rhett video. He talks about, all these politicians who quote unquote dated Jesus or claim to date Jesus. And then, but he's like, but what they're doing seems to be pretty far from what Jesus actually talked about, radical love and all that. And it's like, we live in a world that has become where the major institutions have become ideologically captured by a sort of postmodernist sort of secular humanism. And so what gets really dangerous is people, they get taught things like the doctrine of hell, or things like the Bible's condemnation of homosexuality as they're growing up in their Christian faith. And then they get into the world, and the world's like, well, actually, hell isn't real. And actually, love is just love. And, they slowly, because they have no foundation, they're slowly led astray by this sort of worldly, left-leaning ideologies that basically permeate every institution at this point in time now. As I was doing some research for this topic, I came across this blog, 5 reasons why people deconstruct their faith. And from what I can tell, this person isn't actually a deconstructioner. He's a Christian who is just trying to explain a phenomenon. But even he can't help sort of slipping into this idea that maybe Christians are just a little too right-wing and just a little too unloving, and that's what's pushing people to deconstruct their faith. So you got this quote from his blog right here. People of my generation aren't leaving the church because their devious atheist professors got to them, but because they saw a church more interested in defending political power than in loving their neighbors. And that right there is just like that. It goes back to that idea of, Jesus' message is actually just boils down to love your neighbor and nothing else. And love is whatever makes me feel good. Love is whatever is, people affirming and telling me the things I want to hear. Love isn't, if someone's critical of the way you think, if someone is telling you you're wrong about something, if someone is telling you that something you're doing is sin, then that must not be loving, because that doesn't make me feel good. And I've seen this on the internet. I've seen this in real life. People have this idea of love that is rooted in sort of postmodern propaganda, and they just absorb it uncritically because, again, they lack a foundation of what real biblical love actually looks like.
Yeah, It reminds me of Jesus saying, like, I have not come to bring peace, but to bring a sword. I might be misquoting that. But I know he said that, and I remember hearing, at least I think I remember hearing what he means by that. But what does he mean by that, David?
Like you are quoting the verse, right? I'll actually bring it up real quick.
Yeah, I think it's Luke. Let's see. We're doing real time studying here. Matthew 34, maybe? Yes. Matthew 34.
Yes. Matthew 10:34.
10:34, sorry.
Okay.
Got to reposition the words.
Do not think that I came to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I came to turn a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be the members of his household. And for context, I'll read the next few verses. The one who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and the one who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And the one who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. The one who has found his life will lose it, and the one who has lost his life on my account will find it.
So I bring that up because I think a lot of people, obviously, like Rhett, say, well, isn't it supposed to be radical love? I would argue, and this might sound controversial, I think it's about reckless love. Loving you. Sorry, guys. But reckless love, loving you regardless of your iniquities or mistakes or what have you. But also, he says he's bringing a sword. Now, of course, you could probably get into some end time discussion here, Revelation, what have you, post or premillennialism, David. But
yeah, and
are we called to hate evil?
Yeah, and one thing too about that verse is one of the best ways to interpret Scripture is by Scripture, and in Hebrews it talks about the Word of God being living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword. Basically drawing distinctions. So, with that in mind, it seems like in that passage, Jesus is actually talking about how the gospel and how the Christian way of living, the Christian way of thinking shouldn't just be like, a big all you need is love kind of like everybody's welcome party, but it should actually draw distinctions. It should actually cause somebody to be divided in some way from the world. Now, that's not to say that everybody isn't welcome. Obviously, the call of the gospel is open to all, but a distinction is made. Yeah. It's you have to actually enter through Christ and leave your old way of thinking, your old way of living behind. It's not just come as you are and stay as you are. It's come as you are and then become transformed.
Actual change.
Yeah.
Of the heart. Interesting. Well, that kind of goes into the next part, but are you ready?
Yeah, let's go into it.
Yeah, so I was interested that you brought this up because one more thing on the Wes Huff thing. The video, which we'll have all the videos in the description. I already wrote it for you, David, so I already got that taken care of. But in the description, there's a video called Bible Differences Prove Its Reliability. I think that's the 7-minute video you sent me, or 8-minute, however long it is. But at the very end, Wes Huff said this. He said, the idea that the miracle account arose through careless exaggeration involves an unrealistic process of selective corruption of information in the story. Basically saying, for all of these things to perfectly match together, if they're trying to be, different, then it would be pretty obvious. But they're all very consistent with each other. There's also something he brought up in the lecture, the presentation he did, the half-an-hour video there, where he brings up how the transmission versus translation of the Bible, how we still have manuscripts from is it the 400 AD era?
I think he was talking about a manuscript that was actually from like the 2nd century.
Oh, dang.
So that would have been like in the 300s.
Yeah. So it's like we have stuff that is directly translated from that to today. I think it was called P66 or something, which stood for
Papyrus
66,
number 66
or whatever. It's like I think it's John 1 basically. Like in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. So it's really, really cool stuff that it's not the what David Cross said in the bit where it's like, oh, it was re-edited, retranslated, told orally, and then taken out by the kings and queens or whatever. No, it's, yes, I'm sure maybe there are examples of that, but in reality, the translations we have today of the Bible are so complete, and it's a miracle it's lasted this long. I mean, we're talking 1,800 years ago.
Yeah, that's really
that's crazy.
That's the thing about it too, is like our Bibles today are basically as close as we could possibly get to a total reconstruction of the original text. And yet, basically the vast majority of writings from that time period are completely gone. And yet, the New Testament was somehow well enough preserved to have this level of understanding of it, even like 2,000 years later, or almost 2,000 years later. It's crazy. Like, just to put it into perspective, we have how our complete understanding of the New Testament, because of the many, many manuscripts we have of it, that all corroborate each other and help us to weed out what was changed or what was a mistake or what was inserted by, somebody with ill intentions. We can easily weed that stuff out because of the sheer number of manuscripts and range of dates that they come from that we have. But to compare it to extra biblical accounts of Jesus, there's one historian who is reported to have, and this is a pagan historian from just a little bit after the time of Jesus, who is supposed to have written an account of what he heard about Jesus or the Christ. But all that guy's works, all of his works are all lost.
Whoa.
Thankfully, though, the part about Jesus that he wrote was quoted by another dude.
Oh, heck yeah.
But all of that dude's works are lost.
Oh.
But there was a Christian author much, much later who quoted the guy who quoted the original guy. And that one actually survived to this day. And so that's the only reason we even know that this pagan historian from close to the time of Jesus actually talked about him. And you compare that to, so we got this like third-hand information because the first two guys' works were completely lost. We have none of them left, not even copies that were made. Originals, copies, nothing. They're just completely lost. And all that survives is a third-hand quote from some Christian author who came much, much later. And you compare that to the vast, innumerable manuscripts of the New Testament we have, and just the idea that the New Testament is this as well preserved as it is becomes, frankly, something that you can't even fathom without starting to believe in miracles.
Yeah, it's crazy because I think it's fascinating that it's lasted this long. It's so cool. But I think it also kind of goes to show that in that era as well, when Jesus was around, there was quite a few other pray-tell secondhand that we've heard, messianic figures in quotes. There were quite a few from what I remember reading about. And it's interesting how any writings from those guys didn't survive. Apparently there were hundreds, and during this a couple 100-year period of time, during while Jesus was alive. So it's not that he lived 100 years, but you get what I'm saying. Like that era of the beginning of the millennium and what have you. It's interesting to see that those didn't survive, but then the one that we have today was vigorously copied and spread out and was destroyed multiple times, in the sense of people tried to get rid of it multiple times, different empires. I mean, it's kind of a miracle in itself, like you said. So pretty cool stuff. Also, it's interesting because I bet you during that time, because, the Jewish people were like ready for a revolution against the Romans. They're like, I bet they were so hyped, David, when he said that. They're like, oh, he said he's not bringing peace. He's bringing a sword. I bet some of the disciples are like, yeah, let's do it. And then that, of course, leads into more stuff. But yeah. So anyway, what I wanted to bring up here as we, transform this destructicon of faith, David, is there's a podcast hosted by Theo the comedian, and this is episode 654 that he did, called Something New. It was a episode where it was just him answering feedback from the community, voicemails that people left, which I think is so dope. I think it's really cool that I didn't really get it because I went to go watch this clip from the podcast, but he was answering a voicemail from a caller. It's really cool. And you can find the link for this down in the description if you want. The timestamp is 43 minutes, 34 seconds, roughly that time. And basically, it was this guy who called, and he was kind of saying how it basically boils down to he feels empty with the way he's currently living. And he sort of knows that he needs to make it. He knows he needs to make a change. He kind of gets the idea of he needs to do, but he doesn't know if he has the strength to make that choice. And Theo then goes into a whole thing about along that lines, and in his personal walk of faith, I should say. And it was such a fascinating kind of raw example of the struggle that us humans have, that we are created beings. We seek, we go through struggles, we go through experiences in this life from people that have hurt us and the such and that kind of thing. And it affects and transforms us into who we are today, but we still seek a father's love, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I actually watched from the timestamp, but it was like so good. I just watched to the end of the stream. Yeah, same. I just watched all the way to the end of the stream, and it was like, it's so encouraging because, it can bring us down to think about the secularization of the West and things like the deconstruction movement and things like secular humanist philosophy, just leading our brothers and sisters in Christ away. It can bring you down. But it's just so encouraging to see that even in the midst of all of that, God is still capable of changing hearts.
Yeah.
You could see it in so many unlikely places. You have Theo you have Joe Rogan, it seems like, is starting to be drawn towards Christianity. You have Trump, he's not there yet, but you have him and his administration are actually promoting Christianity from the White House, which is a welcome change. I'm not going to get into, the actual character of Trump or his administration because I'm not endorsing them as, having arrived.
David's
themselves.
Opinions don't reflect the views of Snarp. No, I'm joking.
Yeah. I'm not necessarily saying that they've arrived at, full-on Orthodox Christianity. In many ways, they're still missing the mark. But it is refreshing to see that after, Obama and Biden, to see the White House actually promoting Christianity in America again. And then you have certain other YouTubers who aren't necessarily as big as that, but who I follow, who are starting to trend towards Christianity, or at least starting to be enticed by its doctrines. You have Carl Benjamin, also known as Sargon of Akkad, who hasn't made the jump yet, but has said on multiple occasions that he's basically interested in living as a Christian, even if he doesn't necessarily believe in it, which, that's something.
Yeah, his I remember watching a video from him. His thing's interesting because he said he's doing it for the sake of his kids, because he wants his kids to be brought up in the church, even though if for himself he doesn't necessarily know if he believes in it.
Yeah, and then you have someone who I never thought would be a Christian, is the Scottish YouTuber Count Dankula, of all people, whose shorts I'm actually wearing right now.
There you go. Yeah.
He's actually attending church and now claims to be a Christian. And of course, he still has, I'm not going to say he's fully arrived at orthodoxy either, from what I can see, but also he's a YouTuber. I don't know the guy.
Yeah.
But he's actually going to church and saying he's a Christian.
Which is, wow.
Yeah, so which is pretty wild if you know who that guy is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So seeing this example, there's also the ever back and forth, if you've been on the train of the saga, but Jordan Peterson is another example where constantly, he's so intellectual, he's constantly deconstructing and reconstructing his faith, basically, on a weekly basis. Basically.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it.
That's pretty much it. So you see the struggle in him. There's other YouTubers I follow where you see a change, and it's interesting to see, and then it's interesting to see the build up to it, and then they come out and say it. There's also a couple of Christian YouTubers I follow that are, I think, making an impact and went from I hate gay people to, hey, you know what? I hate evil, but I still want, you to be saved, that kind of thing. So it's interesting for sure. But the thing that I wanted to bring up with the Theo Von thing is it kind of, especially with the caller, because it's something I've been noticing. The caller brought up a thing, basically a feeling of emptiness, and where like it's I would describe it as like, I mean, I'm a dude, so I would equate it to young men, but it also is in young women too. But the feeling of emptiness in life always can come back to haunt you, whether you are like single or living alone, or you're surrounded by people you love. It's a feeling that I think we should not go back to, even though we should not go by what we feel, but remind ourselves of the truth in the scriptures. But when I was watching the caller describe the loop of behaviors he listed, those include hanging with his buddies, going out and drinking, getting girls' numbers, maybe some drugs, walking home drunk, feeling terrible the next morning, then thinking how awful you feel from doing all those things, and then feeling like you need to make a change, you're going to stop doing it, and then telling yourself you're going to do it, and then you repeat the process over again.
Yeah.
And I mean, what did you take away from all that, David?
I mean, that's just human nature right there. I mean, I've had struggles like that my whole life, and I still do.
Yeah.
It's just part of human nature. Not drugs. But
I'm joking.
Just struggling with things that I know I shouldn't do.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, God, forgive me for this and help me to stop. But in the back of my mind, it's like, but I'm still going to do it.
Yeah, and that's something that Theo Von brought up, which I thought was so cool, which is, he said deep in his well, or whatever, in the analogy he used. He's like, I'm even broken down there, man, and it's crazy, man. And he's like, and while I'm praying for God to fix me in this area, that what you said, the little piece in the back of your head that says, but I'm going to do it again. He's like, when that comes up, I'll say, Father, like, help me fix this in this area too, like in the wall of the well, basically, of his heart, which I thought was a really cool descriptor.
Yeah. My hope for Theo Von, and also by extension for the dude who called into him, which triggered this discussion, is he's praying to God for help, but my hope is that he comes to an understanding that that ultimately it's not about performance, and that it's simply about being in Christ, about drawing near to God and having him draw near to you and changing you. And it sounds like he's looking for that, but maybe he doesn't realize that Jesus is right there waiting to give him that. Because, yeah, he says multiple times that I want a new story. I'm ready for a new story. I don't want to live the old story anymore.
Yeah.
And so...
But like you see the struggle where he's like, but I don't know if I can make that choice.
Exactly.
Kind of going back to the thing of if the pain of making the change is more painful than than it is staying the same, you know, you could see that like happening on camera. And you know, he's tearing up at the end and crying basically. And it's really powerful to witness that.
Yeah.
Like what an interesting example. Like it's that stuff I've seen, I don't know, in prayer groups that we've had over the years, you know, like just stuff like that. But then like to see it portrayed in public. I mean, I guess we've seen it in public, but you know what I mean, on the internet.
Yeah.
It's very poignant.
Especially portrayed in a dude who's generally considered to be, I don't know if he's part of the manosphere, but he's at the very...
he's adjacent, for
He's
sure.
at least manosphere adjacent. And you know all the rhetoric surrounding the manosphere, which I really don't like that term because like the people who are in the manosphere umbrella could not be more different from each other.
More like beta sphere. Come on, man.
Because it's like, how on earth can you have a descriptor, a circle, a social circle that includes both Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate?
Exactly.
Like two people who could not be more diametrically opposed to each other are somehow both considered part of the manosphere. But anyway, yeah, so given all the rhetoric that surrounds
there's two wolves,
the quote unquote manosphere, Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate are the two wolves inside of you. Which one are you going to feed? God. Oh, God. Speaking of cringe. Oh, yeah. But anyway, given all the rhetoric that surrounds the quote-unquote manosphere, just to see, like, somebody who's kind of part of that scene, or at least adjacent to that scene, like, just display raw openness and just total humanity is, yeah, it's very cool to see that. And I hope that very soon he realizes that the new story that he wants is available to him in Christ.
Yeah, amen. I did want to bring up kind of another thing I've observed. This caller really reminded me of it, and I don't really know how to end it, but I did want to bring it up. And basically, it's something I've noticed, and I'll bring up examples. So basically, what I've been recently thinking is I see some folks in my life that are my age, late 20s, and they got married or are getting married, and then, or they have a kid or something, and the craziness of life, I watch them skip out of church because of the craziness of life. I see them kind of go for the family, kind of going for what they perceive as the right reason, but not going for their personal walk of faith. And again, I'm not in that position, but I see that happen, and it makes me question or kind of go, like, how do I make that different, you know? But then and again, life is life. It happens, sure. But then I see some of these guys be, you know, they ask themselves, like, why should I keep doing this? Should I keep going to church? Like, I can get more stuff done at the house. The wife's pretty much got it. She's got the kids here. I want my kids to be in church. I can kind of go and be away from here to kind of either get more stuff done or work on my business or do what have you, or enjoy my free time. And I feel like there's a lot of men out there like that have taken a path that's similar of that, to work a Sunday shift or what have you, right? I mean, I just mentioned, like, hey, I'm working Sunday to prioritize youth group right now, so I had to make a choice. That's just how it is right now. But I see it. But it's that my kind of decision of that has made me see that in other people, and I find it interesting. But I don't really have like an answer for it or something to say. Oh, hey, this is how they should get better. But I think it's a great example of a man not leading the home correctly. You know what I mean? Like he should be the spiritual leader of the household. And when you rescind that, it kind of goes against the structure. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That
Like
kinda
if you don't prioritize your spiritual walk as the husband, as the father, how are you going to basically rely on God for when the bad stuff happens, when bad things happen to your family, to your kids, and to your wife?
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of the story of Mary and Martha. So there's a passage in the Gospels where you have Mary and Martha, two women who are sisters who are followers of Jesus, and they're at home, and Jesus is with them, and Martha is doing all the the tasks that need to be done. She's preparing the food, cleaning up, because she's got company over.
Yeah, she got to feed them.
And Mary is just sitting at Jesus's feet listening to him. And Martha sees this and she becomes really upset that Mary's not helping her. And so she goes to Jesus and she says, "Hey, Jesus, tell Mary to help me get this stuff done." And Jesus basically tells her, he says, "Martha, Martha, you're busy with all these things. But the one who actually has her priorities straight right now is Mary. She's sitting at the feet of the master." And that's true for all of us, is in every situation, every life situation we find ourselves in. Yes, life is hard. It requires work. Things have to be done. But we always, 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 always need to prioritize sitting at our master's feet.
Mm.
And otherwise, the Christian walk is impossible without that. I've lived that. Going through a place of trying to go to church and do ministry without having that, prioritizing that simple connection to the Lord, it's never going to end well. And so, yes, it can be tempting to, send the wife and kids to church while you do other things. You think you're, being clever. You're maximizing your
You're min-maxing
your time or your productivity or what have you. But like you said, if you want to truly, truly be a leader, a spiritual leader in your house, you have to be the one prioritizing sitting at Jesus's feet so that your wife and children can see you doing that and follow.
Yeah. Let's transition to the second point I had. There's a really great song by Lecrae, Christian rapper guy, that he did called Change. And it was detailing the caller in Theo Von's like clip there of what he was going through. I'll just read a couple of the little bit of the choruses. And every time they say change, it sounds like like you hear that, but it's supposed to be saying change in the song. But it says, "You don't really know what you were put here for, but before you go, you're looking for a change. They say the Lord don't change, but the more things change, the more they don't change, but your boy needs change." I was going back and listening. I grew up listening to the song, but I went back and listened. I'm like, man, first off, this thing slaps. Number two, looking at the lyrics and correlating with what I just watched was so just in line. And there's a lot of good Christian media like that in terms of music, I would say, especially the rap scene, where it really takes, because usually rap is kind of used to attack or on the offensive of things, disses, that kind of stuff. But with Christian rap, it's interesting because it's kind of a weird, what's the word, dichotomy, oxymoron, I don't know. But it's kind of this weird thing where like it is uplifting, but it's more of fighting the world, fighting the flesh with the spiritual side of music or worship, but in a rap format. It's really interesting and kind of dope. It is, speaking of cringe, it is cringy, first off. But then it kind of goes into like another example I see in my life where there's this young guy who I'm not involved with. I just know him adjacently, and I've never been involved in anything in his life. I just know of him. I've met him like once or twice. And I see him, people showed me like stuff he'd put on Snapchat. He's, I think, 18, and he's going out with the boys, his guys, and they're smoking cigarettes, drinking beer, four-wheeling. I feel like in the, where we are at, David, geographically, there's a lot of, in quotes, good old boys out there that kind of live this, I want to soup up my truck, I want to drink beer. It's just like the country song, I have my dog, whatever, what have you, But it's so, but a lot of these guys come from like Christian or conservative Christian backgrounds, and then they go into this lifestyle of partying or what have you. And we see it all over where you and me live right now in the countryside. But I see this behavior and I see the path he's on, and I saw somebody comment, not online, but to me in person, hey, like I've seen the stuff he's done, and he posts, and he's on the way to basically, the guy was saying basically alcoholism, or making bad decisions that lead to that. And I just think it's interesting that like to see, like you said, I've lived it, like not what that guy's going through, but you said you've lived it, like, and I know there's plenty of people that have lived through that, and they're on their way to making the bad decisions to ruin their life, basically. They have a great thing going on. I mean, this guy's got a great career ahead of him. He's been to a certain trade school that he's going to make a lot of money in the future, and he knows his stuff. He's got great equipment. He's got a truck he's custom building. He's a really clever guy, but I see, maybe it's the old man in me, but I'm like, come on, man, like, come on, little boy, like, make a better decision, But I think it's part of men learning, or some men not learning, how to die to yourself and prioritizing what's right in life. And I think what you gave us the answer kind of right there. And again, it's when you're young and you're in that position, the world's your oyster or what have you. You can do everything you want, or you feel like you can do anything you want. But everything will have consequences to some extent.
Yeah. And it goes back to that Bob Dylan song, you're going to serve somebody. It might seem fun it might seem for fun or fulfilling to build your life on things that are not Christ, but eventually you become slaves to those things, and they'll drag you down to destruction with them. And I guess to kind of wrap everything up that we've been talking about here, I want to really stress that Jesus is the only way to true fulfillment. And you don't have to walk with him in your own strength. The scripture says he is not far from any one of us. Another scripture says that he's knocking on the door of our hearts. So he's right wherever you're at. He's right there waiting for you to draw near to him. And like it says in James, he will then draw near to you. So yeah, I just want to, anybody who is in our listeners who is kind of feeling the pull of the world or feeling like they're getting burned out by trying to live out their Christian faith, I just want to encourage everyone to seek the Lord while he may be found, to draw near to him, because the only way you're going to have the strength, the resilience to make it through this life is by drawing near to God, by sitting at the feet of the Master like Mary did. Got anything else to add before we close out, Jake?
I think I'd just like to add that I think that caller, the guy, Theo Von answering the caller who left the voicemail, made me think of those two things about the, strangely, but it reminded me of like the husbands that are out there or to-be fathers or what have you. And then, of course, the young men, two different seasons of life. And it's funny that the answer still comes back to that, like what you said. But no matter what stage you are in this life, I know it's lonely. Like, it's really lonely. And you don't really have, then the doubt seeps in and you think you don't have any purpose. I think when we started Snarpfangle, I think that was kind of it was kind of like a shock to get into a creative groove, to kind of get this thing going, to consistently make a podcast a week. But that kind of, in a way, saved me from diverting my focus. And I had some other things kind of ironed out, but kind of that was another element of ironing things out in my life for that season. And I'm not saying you got to go make a YouTube channel or something like that, but I think, just like Ruslan said, godly ambition is important. And if you are passionate about something, seek that out and give it to the Father and see where he'll take you with it. I mean, I've talking to, a good buddy of mine. I'm like, you got to start that TikTok that you've been wanting to do, and, centering around Christ. And he's actually done a couple things on it, which I'm proud of him. Shout out to you. You know who you are, and I'm saying that because I can't remember his account. But anyway, it's multiple seasons of life. It's different seasons of life. But I think, like you said, it comes to, you have to be at the feet of the Father to know whether it's a busy season, quiet season, depressing season. You have to draw back to the well that will never run dry.
Amen to that. All right, I think that's where we'll end things off. So, end things off, that's not a phrase. Speaking of cringe.
Oh, man.
All right, well, thank you very much, audience, for listening to the TheoBros Podcast. Thank you, Jake, for joining me on the TheoBros Podcast. If you're out there feeling burned out, feeling the urge to kiss dating goodbye, just remember, snarpfangle on.
Bye-bye now.